Hi everyone, Lee Scott here. Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee, where we talk about life, leadership, and legacy. And before I introduce my very special guest today, if you have not done it yet, go on YouTube and all podcasting platforms to subscribe to Leading with Lee on YouTube and obviously other podcasts. But my very special guest today, I know him through some mutual friends. But he's someone I've always respected and admired for the work that he does. But as I introduce him, I want to share one thing I know about him. He's worked for Teach for America, but he's doing a whole lot of other things that are really, really important and really making a difference in the world. Please welcome to the podcast and vlog, Nate Morris. How you doing, Nate?
Lee, I'm good, man. I'm good. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much
for letting
me share space. This is great.
Great. It's good to see you too. So Nate, thank you for coming on and being on Leading. I trust me, this is going to be a great episode because we've been talking about doing this for a while, and it's, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Right. So my first thing I just want to kind of let you do is kind of just tell people about what you're involved in, what you're working on, and how you're engaging these days in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah, man. So first of all, thank you for having me on. Thank you. Congratulations on finishing your master's. At this point, I know
let's go.
Yes, congratulations. So I've been in Tulsa, like you said, for a while now. Came here with Teach for America. I came here in 2012, and after teaching for a while and working in high schools for a while and with the district, I transitioned and now I work for a nonprofit in town doing community organizing and project management work at the time being. But in addition to that, doing a lot of other work as well, right? So just really grateful to get to be working alongside other individuals, getting to work alongside amazing folks within the Terrence Crutcher Foundation who are doing incredible work, working alongside folks like Laura Bellis in working to push for policies that are going to save people's lives in the pandemic. Just grateful to get to work alongside some amazing leaders in Tulsa.
Well, Nate, I mean, I can't remember when we met. I think I know who we met through. It was Evan Gibbons. That's how we met. But yeah, Evan's great people. But just seeing your activism and seeing how you've been engaged in the process of fighting for different groups of people and how you got engaged in that, I've always admired that about you and just your dedication to causes. So I want to kind of talk to you about that today, because we are in a moment where advocacy is needed and necessary, and advocacy is a very, very complicated space in a lot of ways. So kind of share, how did you get involved? What motivated you? What brought you to, number one, get involved in advocacy, but kind of share kind of the backstory of where that started for you.
Yeah, so honestly, Lee, it started, I think, it started, I'm going to trace it back to Newark, New Jersey, right? So when I was in college, I would go and work, on a spring break with a group of other folks from the college I went to. We would just work with kids in an after-school program in Newark, New Jersey. And for me, it was like the very first time that I was engaging, as a white kid who grew up in, the suburbs of DC, with folks who had a very different lived experience than I did. And it really forced me to confront a lot of preconceived notions and a lot of things that I didn't fully understand about the way the world worked. And I think from there, right, the kids that I met there, who I still know some of them today and still keep in contact with today, really, I think, stuck with me. And so when I came to Tulsa and became an educator, right, those same stories of those kids and my kids that I taught and their families also stuck with me. And so I think there became a deeper recognition of the way that systemic things, systemic racism, systemic oppression, et cetera, affect people that I love and care about. And less of a mantle of let me take up the charge to fix this, and more of a how do I sit back, listen, learn, and understand things that I don't inherently understand, and try to be a part of building something better.
Yeah, and I think that that's a phenomenal perspective for people just in general, because we can often go into a lot of situations that we're not a part of, assuming, right?
Yeah.
And bringing in our preconceived, like you said, bringing in our preconceived notions about communities and what they might need and what they might need from us, and what can we do to fix it. But I think that that's huge that you went into those spaces and was like, okay, I need to learn, I need to grow, I need to be open. Kind of staying right there, what were some of like the lessons you found early on to be like things that has consistently been a narrative that has stayed the same for you, or things that you've said, okay, this lesson right here, I need to hold on to this because this is going to help me in the work that I continuously do beyond this moment? Like, what are some of the things that you took as lessons and said, hey, I'm gonna keep going forward with that?
Yeah, ooh, that's a good question. I think one of the biggest things, honestly, um, is wow, there's so many, but I think one of the biggest things, the first thing comes to mind. Let me say that the first thing that comes to mind is the willingness to shut up when you need to shut up,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
sit down, and like recognize what it
yeah,
means. One, like what it means to be given the granted the I guess privilege of holding space that's not yours to hold and
yeah.
being in a room, um, and how you what it requires of you to navigate that space with respect. And two, um, I think it also, you know, I also had to learn and more deeply understand what it looked like to just allow myself and hold myself in a position where I was of service and not trying to lead something, right? That's not like,
Mm,
because that's
yeah,
not what I'm supposed to be doing unless that's
yeah,
like what I need to do. So I don't need to, I think very often, especially folks who are potentially coming from my position where um, you know, wealthier suburbs or whiter suburbs, or you're in an organization like Teach for America, and like a lot of the time it's like it's an emphasis on leadership and being out in the front. But in
wow,
reality, that's not the position that we need to be, speaking to white folks, like holding in a lot of times. And it's how do we kind of step back and do the things that are asked of us to do in that moment. That
wow,
makes
wow. I That's a very great perspective, because I think that's encouraging for anybody that's watching or listening to this. They'll realize, wait, it's the key word you said was serve.
sense.
Like, Nate, I think that we live in a culture that's so driven by this feeling of I have to make this happen and make this happen and make this happen. And I got to do this. And it's me, 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 me. And we forget the intent of why we're even involved in what we're doing in our community.
Yeah,
Like, we
yeah,
start making the community about us
right.
and not about what we need to do. We about to say
Yeah.
something?
No, I think that's so good. And I think that with that word itself, I think there's a tendency to think to, when we use the word serve, to think of how you're helping somebody who like is in desperate need of help. And that's not actually, like, you're not like coming from on high, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
savior of the word serve. And so I think
yeah,
also disassociating uh, that sort of dichotomy that exists within that word
yeah.
is important to do as well. Yeah.
So in a practical sense, how does service actually look? Because there are a lot of preconceived notions about what
Yeah.
service actually is and how you do it. So how should that look if somebody's involved in advocacy or doing the hard work of serving communities?
Yeah, I think it really requires somebody to be very, very intentional about understanding the community that they're working to be a part of and serve alongside. Because it's going to look different in the moment. It's going to look different uh, in the community, in the room. It requires you to first do that work of sitting back and listening and learning before you try to jump in.
Yeah. I think there's such wisdom in that. Kind of staying there. I wonder sometimes if we're in a moment where people are eager to do this, or be involved in this kind of work. And maybe you could speak to this and maybe give me some clarity on this, because as someone who's kind of active, but not really active at this present moment, some things are changing in my life. I can't reveal it on here yet, but some things are happening in my own life that we were talking about before we got started.
Yeah.
But what are, like, how can people really take that energy? Because I think if anything in the last 5 or 6 years, because of certain candidates coming into the fold, people have gotten very active in the political and social process, and different things. How can people, like, really be guided with that eagerness to get engaged and involved and be more strategic, instead of just like, man, we need to help everybody, we need to change this, we need to do this? Like, what are some advice you can give to people on that? I didn't come with easy questions. I'm sorry.
You did not. Okay, so right now, okay, so this is what, August 17th, right? And so, like, right now, one of the things that is most preeminent in the current conversation is Afghanistan, right? So we are currently living in the moment where Afghanistan has been overrun by the Taliban, where people are trying to flee for their lives. And it is happening because of an incumbent failure of our government. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I also, like, this could be the wrong perspective, and I will probably learn from this moment, but that people are like, let's step up and let's do something to help.
Right.
That's good, right? And I've heard this message and think it's one to reflect on from Afghani folks who now live in America or who were born here. Where have you been for 20 years, right? So for 20 years, like, granted, we were children when this war started, but for all of our lives, we've been living in a moment where our nation is occupying another nation that is not ours. And now as this is unfolding, there is this, like, blame levied against the nation itself for what's happening, when in reality, like, that's not true. And so I think that, to get, I guess, back to the point of your question, right? Like, it is good in the moment when things are happening, and, like, when there's a dire need, to jump in and, like, meet that need. It's also important to take a step back and think, why did this get to this moment?
Yeah.
How did I contribute to it by an action? And what do I need to learn to ensure that I can be a part of ensuring it doesn't happen again, right? I think that's what we also have seen with, the last 4 years, fighting to ensure that the former president is, the actual former president. But can't stop there.
I their response was a great response. But it's a very honest and authentic response, especially considering the fact that, like, we sometimes get into, particularly in our culture, we and you can push back on this if you feel the need to. There seems to be, from my perspective, as somebody who's not necessarily in the advocacy space, there seems to be two lanes of people, right? There seems to be some who were in the game, doing the work, working really hard, like, on the ground, very involved in the everyday affairs of trying to change an issue, right? We got those everyday activists who people don't know their names, but they're doing great work and literally are transforming people's lives. You're one of them, right? where every single day you're engaged in the process of making people's lives better, and those people are about the work. And then you have this other lane, which I'm not saying, this is just an observation. It's not even, and let me make a caveat, because I don't want to get you know, chewed out for this later. But but there's this other lane that is, there has become this celebrity around advocacy. Do you know what I'm saying? That they're like, there are people that have been doing the work for 20 some odd years, and you know, they're now going to just do, and people are celebrating them and you know, honoring them for their work, right? You know, like the Tamika Mallory's of the world, you know, she's been doing this for 20 years, you know, like and there are other people that have been doing it and have been out there doing the work. And then there's people who, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but just an observation, it seems like has capitalized a little bit on the moment and seem to, yes, they care about the issues, but it seems as if there's these two things happening to me, where you're using kind of your platform or your position to be like, oh yeah, I want to now talk about these issues because I think it matters, or I care about it now because it's a moment of convenience for me to talk about it, or you know, it's kind of the trending thing. You can correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think is driving that? Because I feel like it's a lot of that happening to some degree, where and I'm going to say this to the side because I'm going to let you respond, but it's in the side because we see it in corporate America, where in the last year or so, we're seeing corporate America all of a sudden decide to do all this DEI stuff. And I'm not saying that it's wrong and they didn't need to do it, but they're doing all this, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, and saying we're going to hire certain people, we're going to give money to certain organizations, we're going to give to LGBTQ organizations now, we're all supportive of Pride now, or we're all supportive of Black people now, or brown folks, you know. And it's kind of like, thank you, but I'm not sure what's the driving force. Do you get what I'm trying to kind of get at?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So like, honestly, like even to that point, let me like back up real quick, right? Because the like wisdom from what I just said like didn't come from Nate. It came from like somebody called, her name is Anita Wardock, and she has her Instagram is Burkus, Burqas, and beer on Instagram, and right, like I would encourage folks to follow her because that shifted my perspective of, you know, when it came specifically to Afghanistan, like what have I been doing and thinking, right? So I want to make sure that credit isn't Nate's, that's hers. And that honestly like gets to your point, right? Because it's like that's not something I was talking about or thinking about, right? Because I had the ability to just kind of like shirk it off into a different atmosphere, and I didn't have to think about it. And so I think that there is a need, right, to be very self-critical, not in a like pejorative way, right? Not in a way that's you know self-damaging, but be very like critical and aware of the fact that because of the fact that we exist and live in a white supremacist culture and a white supremacist nation and a white supremacist society, like we are, specifically speaking to white people, you know, in particular, enculturated with this ability to kind of have, for lack of better phrasing, blinders on and just not see what's happening around us. And so we have to be very much okay with being critical of the way in which we're interpreting things, and to receive that criticism as well, and not take it as an attack when we do something and jump into a space. We're like, hey, I want to help. And it's like, where you been at? And the response is, it shouldn't be, well, I didn't know, because that's not an excuse when people are living with oppression and people are having to engage in that. It's not an excuse. It's simply a need to kind of step up to the plate and say, yeah,
Yeah.
I should have been more mindful of that. And now I'm going to do the work
Right.
of understanding how I can better show up.
Yeah, great answer. But it legitimately made me think of conversations that I have with Bree, my girlfriend Bree,
Yeah.
and when she points out some things to me as a man that I literally don't even deal with.
Yeah.
There have been several times where we were, several times we were either coming to her apartment or she came with me somewhere or whatever. And one example very specifically, I remember it came right to my mind. I was coming to my apartment and she was just coming over with me and I was about to just come and get some stuff or whatever. And there were like some people standing outside. Now, Bree's immediate response was like, babe, we need to go the other way. I was like, well, why do we need to go the other way? I'm like, my apartment is right there. She's like, we need to go the other way. And, my knee-jerk reaction was to get defensive. And then I had to realize in that moment, and literally this happened literally in real time. I realized like, wait. She's saying this not because we couldn't go this way. She's saying this because, wait, she's not a man. She's a woman, and she knows that if she walks this path by herself, something could happen to her. I realized, wait, you don't live with that fear. You don't live with the fear that something can happen to you by simply walking from your car to your apartment. But she does.
Yeah.
And so I literally in that moment found myself apologizing to Bree and saying, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't realize that I was not being aware that this is the reality for you.
Yeah.
This is not something that I experience, but you experience. And then, Nate, we could have a whole other conversation about intersectionality, but that's not what we're about to do today, because that will be a whole thing about that one. But literally, as you said, like, becoming aware is such a potent thing and helpful for all of us to learn. You're about to say something?
No, I was just gonna. No, I think that's such a good point because I think even highlights the reality, right? That it's like we also have to acknowledge moments that, like, I wasn't aware in that moment. And so when it comes to like another situation, and we see this a lot happening in the world today, when it comes to another situation where somebody else isn't yet aware of that moment, like, it's also incumbent on us, on folks to kind of step back and say, how am I going to like engage this person? Am I going to engage them in a way that is like, here, like explaining and laying out, like, here is why there is a lack of understanding and what you maybe need to understand? Or am I going to engage in a way that's like very, very aggressive and very much like an attack? And I think, again, I'll just speak to my own experience. I think it's like, as a white person in particular, when we're talking about, especially issues of race and systemic racism, it is like it's not like my place to say, oh, I'm going to go and like completely attack somebody for not understanding something that at one point in my life I didn't understand either. That's not helpful. And that's actually like perpetuating that same system of oppression.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that your example like just hits it on the head.
Yeah, I think it's super helpful to have the right perspective, but something that I would just encourage you in, and people that watch this and listen to this, is sometimes what we are dealing with in our culture and our society is definitely what you said about like coming in with the appetite to learn and grow in that regard, but also starting to have those conversations among your people that you engage with.
Yeah.
Right. Because as you know, and Nate, because I know you and I follow you on social media, you be having them conversations and you say it like it is. Like, and for me, in things that I've been learning these things, but conversations that I've been having with Bree, it's now requiring that I have those conversations with men that I'm in relationship with, right?
Right.
It's to challenge them. Hey, I didn't know this, or I knew this, but I didn't understand it or comprehend this. Hey, this comes up in a conversation with a male friend of mine, and I have to be like, hey, bro, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Or hey, bro, I didn't understand that either, but I think that what I'm learning in my relationship, or what I'm learning from my sister, or what I'm learning from some of my female friends, what I'm learning from the women in my life is this has to be this way, right? And I think that that's a huge thing for people to recognize and realize in this moment. Is I think everybody has to become students of just people and the situations that we're in. Like, right as we're talking right now, everybody needs to approach this conversation. And I mean, this obviously will be released later this year, but even right now, what's happening in Afghanistan, all of us need to approach it as students. Listen, like you said, listen to them. Moving on, I think that's a great point, and helpful for us to really think about, based on what you said. Like, we have to be advocates for communities. So shifting a little bit, as I was sitting here, I was thinking about how much advocacy has grown, not just in a sense of, it's kind of a cool thing, but not like a real authentic thing, but generationally, it has become such a key aspect of how we engage the world, right? Like our generation, us as millennials, and then the kids behind us, Gen Z, like there is an appetite for advocacy and activism in some form. It may not all be the same thing, but there seems to be a drive for that. I mean, we know Gen Z kids, when it comes down to climate change, they're not playing. They are gangster about climate change. Like they are not having it. So my question for you, why do you think we are seeing more leaders come from the activism space, particularly in the political space? We're seeing business leaders, we're seeing politicians, we're seeing, school board folks come from the activist space.
Yeah.
We're talking about, these are not corporate folks. We're talking about people, because literally they were 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Just, an activist. I mean, we got people like Cori Bush, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You got just variety of people who were in the trenches that way and are involved. So why do you think that that's happening more and more nowadays?
And it's a really good question. First, I love Gen Z. I know some people don't. That's their problem. I think honestly, like, it is so, and I mean that sincerely, because I think that it is just like so profoundly inspiring. I sound like an old man, but it's so like profoundly
We're
inspiring.
not old, Nate.
I know, but I'm not gonna lie to you. I do have the like Zoom like touch-up filter on.
Oh my gosh.
Really honest, it's there. If y'all ain't use it, hover over that video button.
As you were saying, I'm sorry.
But I think, like,
oh man,
it really. I am like legitimately encouraged by Gen Z, because to the point that you just made, like they're not playing about a vast majority of things, and I think it's really beautiful to watch them sort of kind of come to a space where they're not ignorant to lines of difference, as those lines of difference have kind of evolved and shaped society, but they're also very much, I think, more understanding and more tolerant and more like thoughtful and more intentional around embracing things that, frankly, like millennials and older have really struggled to embrace. And so I think that they are pushing things in an incredible direction. That it's really cool to watch, and it's like cool to see and think about what will generations beyond, I don't know what comes after Z, look like, right?
It's gonna, and this is an aside, but they're saying that millennials kids are gonna be called Generation Alpha.
Okay, cool. Alpha.
Which person, I'm like, that's a flex. Why would you give them? Okay,
Right.
over.
Right. I love it though. We're getting rid of gender norms and we're starting with alpha. It's gonna be great. It's beautiful. So I think, but to your question about like why are more activists getting elected? As you were saying that, I was like, no. But then honestly, I think we've had activists getting elected.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
I think on like both sides of the aisle. I think that when we think of activism, though, it's a label that has been like generally ascribed, and I'm not mad at it. It's a label that's been generally ascribed to like or prescribed to
Progressives.
But you have had people in office who are like, I will completely obliterate a woman's right to choose. I will give everybody a gun and whatever else. And nobody can get married. And I think that like,
I mean, that's real. That's very real.
Right. And those people are like activists. They're just not given like the activist label because people try to make it a pejorative label, as we here in Tulsa.
Right.
And so I think that you have people who are, I think for so long, progressive folks have been afraid of being labeled activists. And now people are like, other people have been doing that for bad reasons for a long time. We're going to like take that up and embrace it and be like, we're going to fight just as hard and just as fiercely for justice as people have been fighting for injustice for a really long time.
Right. And to your point, Nate, all their activists are actually lobbyists.
There you go. Yeah.
They're
really well-paid activists.
Yes, literally, they're literally activists, but we call them lobbyists.
Right.
But I digress because that could be a whole situation. My next question for you, Nate, is how can advocates create like real life action and change? I think we're at a moment where a lot of advocates are pushing really hard for our leaders to make better decisions. But how can we kind of take some of the kind of be solution oriented? You know what I mean? Like how do we connect the two? And it's probably happening, but there may be some people who watch this or listen to this and say, man, I want to be an advocate. I want to, fight for an issue, but I don't know what policy thing I should be doing. Like what, I'm for this, but what's an actionable step? Like what are some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say so. I was privileged to kind of sit on a call with Teslin Figueroa, who like is a really brilliant activist, and she kind of like did that breakdown of like where do you fall in that activist spectrum, right? And so are you somebody who's going to be like out front warrior, ride or die? Are you somebody who's going to like be there, but like when things get like really really tough, you're like, I'm not going to jail for this? Or are you somebody who's like, like I'm going to say the right things and use the platform I have just to speak, right? Yeah. I'm not going to say like one is better than the other. What I'm going to say is like, I think it's important to understand where you're at in the moment that you're in it, right? I think it is not helpful. And she I think framed this really, really well. It is not helpful for people to enter into a space that's like a level above where they're actually at in the moment.
Wow. Oh, that's wisdom.
It is. I mean, she's brilliant, and so it tracks. But like you can't be like be on the front. Like, it's, I mean, this was the analogy she used. Like, why are you going to be on the you know, the front lines as a warrior for something when you don't even know how to use a gun? Like, why would you do that? When you're not even like trained to be a medic, like, why are you gonna? Don't do it. That's not for you, right? You're not there. You could be one day if that's where you want to be, but right now, like, we also need people. You know, there is just as valuable a role for people who are like behind the scenes, making sure that everybody has food and water, making sure that everybody is able to get rest, making sure that all the documents and the logistics are taken care of. Like, all of that is just as important as people who are on the front lines, like being the face of something. So I think it's really important to not, you know, and in the age of social media, it is sometimes, you know, really easy to feel like, oh, if I'm not like out front of this protest or posting or like whatever, I'm not helping. But then you have people who, like a friend of mine who I have an unbelievable amount of respect for, DeRay McKesson, right? Who is also, you know, up until like, you know, 3, 4 in the morning, just coding, you know, FOP contracts so that people can search and see what police are able to do in what city, right? And like what their contracts allow for. Or people like in Tulsa, like Greg Robinson, Tiffany Crutcher, Christy Williams, you know, Chief Amusan, Vanessa, so many others who just do the day-to-day on the ground, really hard work and fill a lot of roles and take a lot of hits, and do it not with the expectation that they're going to, you know, get something out of it, but they do it with the expectation that things are going to change because they believe that they're doing it, because they just are going to do it until it does. And so I think that for everybody else, right, it's important to kind of listen and understand, going back to that first point, like what needs to happen and what needs to be done, and to not kind of just like go rogue and do something if you don't understand like that it's the right thing to do. And two, to figure out like what people who are like on the front lines need, instead of trying to jump yourself into that space, right? If that's what's needed, go do that, right? But be understanding and be like deeply engaged enough to know that that's what's needed and how to do it. But if you're not, then figure out like, how can I support the Terrence Crutcher Foundation?
Right.
Is that through donating? Is that through showing up to volunteer? What is that? And understand like how you can start to fill those roles now. And I know I'm being long-winded. I'll also say there was this woman who ran for Senate in Montana a long time ago. She, you know, lost, but she said something that has stuck with me, and it was she's like, I'm here doing this now, right? Like, I'm running for the United States Senate simply because I showed up and said yes, right? I was in a room where I just got invited, and somebody said, hey, come to this meeting, come to this council meeting, whatever. I did. I showed up and I said yes. And so eventually I kept showing up and I kept saying yes. And that put me in spaces where I was supposed to be to fill the role I needed to fill. So I just encourage people to just show up and say yes when you're asked to show up.
Oh, that's great. That's a great response and a great perspective to push people to realize that all of us can play a role and all of our roles are necessary, right?
Yeah.
As you were talking, Nate, it reminded me of a story that I've heard some people tell, and there's this investor that I personally have an affinity towards, but he talks about Andrew Young a lot, and he talks about how Andrew Young was a part of the civil rights movement. We see him with Dr. King, but we don't see a lot of photos of Andrew Young. We don't really see a lot of photos at that time, but Andrew Young was like Dr. King's right-hand man. And anytime Dr. King would go into a community and organize a rally and protest and do all the different things and, you know, go and get arrested and all these different things would happen, he would turn around and send Andrew Young to go talk to community leaders. Go talk to business leaders and say, hey, you need our economic power from our community.
Yeah.
How can we work together for us to get the things that we want and you get the things that you want? Like,
Yeah.
just the fact that this man knew his role, like, that's super helpful for us to recognize that we all have a role to play in moving the pendulum, moving the goalposts, pushing the culture to accept and recognize that this is not okay what we're doing. Somebody has to play a certain role. I think that's super encouraging. If it's not encouraging for people to watch this or listen to this, it's encouraging for me because I recognize that, like, I'm probably like most people who want to do more, but the reality is I have a full-time job.
Right.
I only have so much money in my bank account every 2 weeks or every week or every month to where I can't just give as much money as I want to give to an organization. Right. I don't have, $400 in the savings account. That's a whole other conversation about the fact that most Americans don't even have money to save, Yeah. So I think that's super helpful for us to recognize that we can all play a role and play something in this space. You go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. That, like, is making me think even deeper. Like, I think that, kind of stamping this earlier, point we're talking about, it is, like, really important to listen and hear when people are calling out and saying, why are people not showing up, right? But it's also equally important to reflect and be like, how am I, like, capacity wise able to show up in this moment, and where is it best for me to show up? So people, you're gonna have those, like, why aren't people doing this, right? Like, why aren't you giving to this, or why aren't you, like, showing up at this? And sometimes that's just not what you're supposed to be or what you're supposed to do in that moment, where you have the capacity to do. It's like, find what you can do, and what fits, like, where you're at in that moment, while also, like, pushing yourself to consistently do more.
Yeah. That's super helpful. And I think people will see that there's opportunities. There's opportunities everywhere. I mean, literally, there's opportunities everywhere. You made me think about something just then, and you can either add to this or give a better perspective about this, but could advocacy and activism actually be closer to us than we actually really realize or think?
Can you say more about that? Sorry.
No, it's legitimate. I know. I asked that because what if activism for a person actually is they live in a particular community, and activism for them is, if I care about the environment, let me on my street go and pick up the trash on my street. Or I live in an apartment complex. I'm white, I'm Hispanic, I'm Black, I'm whatever, and poverty is a big issue to me, and I go out of my way to ensure that the kids that live across the hall eat every day. Like, I don't know why that popped in my mind or that just clicked with me, but I think sometimes we don't realize, in a sense, that's giving you, and you can correct me wrong, and I'll let you comment on that, but in a sense that is creating a level of, I guess, tangible results. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's really good. I don't know if everybody will agree, but I think it's good. Because I think there's.
Thank you.
I think it is important to recognize that sometimes it doesn't, and we kind of hate this, but it doesn't look always like I made a sign and I went to a march or I spoke at a city council meeting, right? Like, sometimes, like, when you asked at the beginning, it's like, what got me into feeling, activism, quote unquote, or whatever, and my answer was, like, the students that I serve, like my kids. And sometimes for me, right? Like being an advocate or acting on their behalf or acting in like service to them looked like just showing up to a soccer game with orange slices, right? Um, and that was what it was in that moment, right? That was the best way that I could show up, and that's like that for me was like the best use of my time on that Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, right? Like that was it. Because also it was something that like, and honesty and candor, like it filled me up too. Um, and so I think it's important to like allow, like you said, like I think that's such a good point. Because like you're allowing like this recognition for this is what I'm doing, like in my own locus of control to help ensure that these things are better. And I think like collectively, obviously, there's also an important like role to play in ensuring that the system that creates things that we think are unjust and that need to be acted upon, that we're at large working to change those as well.
Yeah.
I think that oftentimes the small things can get overlooked for the things in the spotlight. And
Yeah.
it's, and you made this really great point earlier. There's a lot of folks who can kind of be searching for that spotlight and getting it without doing the small acts of service that,
Yeah.
that really are getting folks, really are like what matter, truly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I'm getting towards the end. I'm debating whether or not I'm going to ask you this question or not, but because I think that we have kind of been touching on a lot of like very practical and helpful ways where people can really in some ways like change their posture when they think about advocacy. I think that you've given a lot of wisdom and just practical, thoughtful things about advocacy. You brought this up earlier, like finding people that you can follow on social media, finding people you can listen to, finding folks that you may not have uh, a lot of connection with, reading literature, like all these things are coming to my mind as you were saying the things that you're saying, because it's like, it's evident that awareness, as we even realize in our own lives, awareness is the key to our success just in general. Like when we know things, we tend to have a as though the old saying goes, we tend to have skin in the game when you know something, right? You tend to be more committed to the transformation or the change that could happen in that space because you actually have given of your time, talent, finance. I mean, you put a lot of thought into those issues. I mean, that's how I feel about my home state. I'm not physically in Mississippi right now, but mentally, emotionally, who I support when I vote in elections, what issues are important and central to my belief about what's happening in my home state is because I put some skin in the game. Now I understand I'm engaged because it's my home state, but there's no obligation for me to be engaged, right?
Yeah.
I'll live there.
Yeah.
Like as of right now, I'm not back in the state yet. Like it's just not the case. So I think that is super helpful for people to understand. So I think I am going to ask you this question because I think it's you kind of answered it already, but what do you think are some first steps? What do you think are some ways that people can say, man, okay, Nate has put some fire underneath me. He's encouraged me. He's cut me a little bit, hurt my feelings a little bit, but it actually was what I needed to hear. How can people really say, man, I'm just gonna go for it, and I'm just gonna try? What are some ways that people can do that?
Yeah. So I appreciate you, man. And I'm sorry this took us so long to have this conversation.
I know.
So,
I know.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start like by saying that while I'm honored to like, be in this space with you, I definitely like by no means have all the answers. And I'm just trying to consistently learn as I go, and consistently like hone and more deeply understand the responsibility that I have, right, as a white person who lives in this country, to step up and sit back and serve in the ways that I'm supposed to serve. So I'm not. I hope it's, I just want to, I guess, preface, take this all with a grain of salt, and there's other people to listen to aside from just Nate. From my perspective, and from my experience, I guess I would encourage folks to just be cognizant of the fact that you don't have all the answers, and that you should be very, very willing, when, I guess going back to that, show up and say yes, like, do that. And maybe I would amend it to show up, say yes, and be cognizant of the space that you're taking up, right? And the space that you're holding. And perhaps it's even just to show up and listen, and not necessarily show up and say yes. Show up and say
less.
Yeah. I'm like verbal processing this, but I think that's starting with maybe just to show up, right? Listen, learn, and then understand what steps you need to take in that moment, right? Because it's really important not to just act, right, for what you think is best for a community that isn't yours, as if the community itself doesn't have people who are very deeply and eloquently and powerfully engaging in the work, far beyond any capacity that a lot of us could possibly imagine doing. And so I think it's understanding the space that you're stepping into and the role that you're supposed to play, and that starts by showing up and listening.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful, and man, Nate, I really, really appreciate this conversation, because I think that it gives people a helpful starting space to not feel as if it's impossible. It's very possible. It's very possible for all of us to play a critical and key role in the transformation of our country, our communities, and literally, like, getting out of this belief that it's out there. Like, I feel like culturally we struggle with that, because it seems to be, and I know I have like 3 more questions for you, and every time you say something, it makes me get fired up for like 20 seconds, but we don't realize a lot of times how close we are to some of the biggest issues that our communities face.
Yeah.
If we only knew what was going on in our local government,
right,
or our county stuff, or our state stuff, and yes, we obviously know what the federal stuff is, but if we would just get to a place where literally, like you said, we go to a city council meeting, or not, even if we don't go to a city council meeting, go to a town hall meeting that your city councilor is having. At the county library, on Zoom, find out who their chief of staff is, or any role that they play in your local government. Find out who's on your school board. I've had friends in recent years run for school board because they were like, what is happening in education? And then they start realizing, like, wait, I'm the answer to the problem. Oh, duh, it's me. The reason why they don't see it is because I'm not there. I'm the one that sees it.
Right.
And we have to get to that place and start doing that kind of work and be about that action.
Yeah.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask my last few questions, because I could go on a whole tangent about that, and I do not want to keep you on here until we both end up falling asleep, because we're going on and on about this. But my last few questions for you, and this is my first one. So what are some of the things that you're reading? I mean, obviously you have to take in so much information because of your work, but what are some things you're reading or watching or listening to that's really like feeding your soul and feeding your mind and really giving you some more perspective about the world?
Man, that's a great question that I don't have a good answer to. So I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm really not. I'm just not right now.
It's
Um,
cool.
and I know that's just like a, there's gonna. I need to get back into this. And I'm not saying that as like I do feel that, but there also is like a moment where I'm like, oh my god, I'm just gonna. What is on HGTV right now?
Right,
So you
right.
know, whatever it is. So I think that
What are you watching on HGTV right now?
oh, stop it. Backyard Builds is a really great show that I actually like. I love it, man. It's just like stupid stuff like that that's like inconsequential to anything, but is a little bit of a reprieve
Right.
from what can be a lot.
Hey, listen, because of the work that you do and because of the people's lives, having that opportunity to be like, is actually a great thing.
Yeah.
So I have no issue with you saying that that's the thing that you're going to focus on,
honest,
and is your answer in this present moment. You good?
I could lie. Listen, right. What is next on my list though is How the Word Was Passed by Clint Smith. That's the next thing that is on my list.
Okay. I think that's great. That's great. So I ask this question all the time because it was a question that was posed to me by one of the higher ups in the company that I work for, and she would always say this, and it stuck with me. And she's always challenged me on this. What are some of the ways in which you're paying it forward? Like, what are you involved in? What are you doing to mentor the next generation or engage people by paying it forward? How are you paying it forward in your life?
Mm. That's a good question. I think um, I'm like really trying to lean into. So I, if I'm being very candid, I think over the last year and a half, right, there has been a lot of tendency like in myself to kind of just like get very selfish with my time, which is not a bad thing, and also to kind of like pull back HGTV, hence that. And again, not always a bad thing. But I think that, you know, what I have been like very grateful for is watching other people in my orbit, people like, for Tulsans, right? People like Brandon Oldham, again, like Greg and Tiffany Crutcher, like a ton of humans, Vanita Cooper, Onigasimo Caesar, a ton of people who are just like consistently working and giving back. And I have just like been very inspired by them. And I think it is like pushed my thinking of being like, right, you need to get out of like whatever this rut is that you're in and really like kind of get back into a space of service. And so for me, it like I've had to like shift back to that. How do I better show up and say yes in certain moments? And how do I, start to pick up the mantle, for instance, like when it comes to, COVID, right? And stuff happening with Save Our State and everything. Like there's a lot of people who are working and we all get really tired. And at one point or another, we kind of pick stuff up and run with it. And it's like, okay, how can I like push myself to have the energy to do that? And so I think it's, just trying to kind of recognize moments where it's like, you need to do a little better right now. And you need to kind of like see where you can pick up slack for somebody else. And that's what I'm trying to do a better job of in this moment.
That's great. And here's my last question. It's kind of a fun question. But what song will you use to describe yourself and why? I want your honest answer because trust me, Nate, I've got some interesting answers. I've gotten answers from Nuck If You Buck to the theme song of Braveheart to Travis Green, You Made a Way. I've gotten all kinds of songs. So you can give me a real honest answer.
Like describes me in this moment or describes me as a human? I don't know.
wait, that's a very interesting way to receive that question. Describe me in this moment, describe me. Let's go with moments. I mean, well, no, do human, because everybody has a song with their life. Do human, because and I don't even really care what the song is.
I know you don't. I just like I'm not gonna lie. Like, of all the questions to fumble on, it's gonna be this one. I don't know, man. I really don't know how to. I don't answer this question for you. I'm sorry. I know it's random, but I just don't. I just really don't.
I'm gonna leave this in.
It's fine. You can.
Right.
I have no idea.
Nate has no song, guys. For the first time on Leading with Lee, somebody does not have a song and can't even come up with a song.
Yeah.
Describe themselves. So there's always a first, and you've had a lot of first on this episode. Thank you for coming on. Nate Morris, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think you fired me up quite a few times in our conversation, and I'm super excited for people to hear this and watch this, and it's going to be great. So thank you for coming on, Nate.
Thank you, man. Thanks for giving me grace. Thanks for letting me be on here. I appreciate you. Grateful to know you, and just inspired by all the things you're doing. So, yeah.
All right, brother. Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee. If you have not done it yet, subscribe today on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. To get more information about me and what I'm doing, email me at scottconsultations@gmail.com or follow me on social media on Twitter and especially Instagram at Lee A. Scott II or Lee A. Scott II. Thank you for watching this week's episode. I really appreciate it. Much love, and let's get started.